thank the Ethics Center for bringing us all together tonight, and particularly to Joan and Barry, who's organized tonight's event. So my name is Debbie Muckaball. I'm the Executive Director of the Stanford Criminal Justice Center here at the law school. It is well agreed, not an alternative fact, in fact, that our country relies too much on incarceration. Tonight, over 2 million people are sitting in prisons and jails across our country, and another 6 million individuals are serving probation or parole sentences. Here in California, 200,000 people are incarcerated in prisons and jails on any given day, and it is estimated that 8 million Californians are living in the community with an arrest and a conviction record. Every month, the California Department of Corrections releases more than 3,000 men and women, each of whom returns to their family and community, and all of whom must rebuild their lives. Returning home from prison and jail is not easy. Finding employment can be extremely difficult, and many formerly incarcerated community members lack the skills necessary to succeed in today's job market. Finding ways to ensure their successful reentry is important for them, their families, and all of our communities. College might provide one of the answers, as we'll hear tonight during our discussion. What then does our higher education resources look like here in California? Well, California has a very well-established and robust public higher education system with 113 community colleges, 23 California state universities, and 10 University of California campuses. 4 out of 5 undergraduate students in our state are enrolled in one of these 3 systems. Recently, several California public colleges and universities were rated among the best, in fact, in the nation in moving low-income students to higher wealth. California's criminal justice and higher education systems, though, have not traditionally worked and collaborated together. They've actually often operated in silos. Until 2015, college courses inside our prisons were barely accessible, and the opportunities when they existed were almost exclusively low-quality, non-interactive correspondence courses, paper and pen, that you sent to a college. And hopefully you got back an answer to your question before the midterm, but usually it came back afterwards. And outside custody, we really had few programs that specifically to help formerly incarcerated students succeed when they were in school. But the landscape in California is actually changing dramatically, and California is emerging as a national leader. Excuse me, 1 minute, though. I give you some maps. So, you see in 2014, we had 1 in-person college program in our prisons. We have 35 prisons in California. And 2 years later, we now actually have 29 in-person college classes being taught in our prisons. It's quite a big difference in a 2-year period of time. In 2014, we had 1 program at a California State University campus called Project Rebound, which was founded 40 years ago by a sociologist named John Irwin, program to support formerly incarcerated students getting into and then succeeding in college. We now have 9 Project Rebound programs on campuses throughout California. So we've seen a huge difference in 2 years. And then finally, we had 4 community colleges had programs to support formerly incarcerated students in 2014, and now we have 13. So it's changed quite a bit in a very short period of time, which is terrific. And tonight we'll talk about why and how college should become more accessible to currently and formerly incarcerated students. Our distinguished panel includes those leading our state in creating and prodding others to create and make college available to more students, both inside prison and on our college campuses. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our fantastic moderator, Larissa McTrucker, who is going to lead our discussion and introduce briefly our panelists. Just briefly, Larissa's been a staff writer at The New Yorker since 1998, where she recently wrote a captivating piece on the undergrad scholars program at UC Berkeley that many of you might have read. She's the author of Strangers Drowning, grappling with impossible idealism, drastic choices, and the overpowering urge to help, about people living extremely ethical lives. And it was published in 2015.
Debbie, thank you so much. Can you all hear me? Just checking that this microphone works since we're sharing it. So we have an extraordinary panel today, and I'm just going to tell you very briefly about each person, but there's much, much more to say, and I hope some more information about their work will emerge naturally as we discuss this subject. So at the very end is Choate, who is the Superintendent of Correctional Education at the California Department of Corrections. And so that means he oversees all educational programming, including college programming at all the state's 35 prisons. And before that, he served as the education director at the LA Sheriff's Department. Next to him is Laura Hope, who is the Dean of Instructional Support at Chaffey College. Chaffey, I meant to ask her beforehand how to pronounce that's Chaffey College, which is a community college located in Rancho Cucamonga. And over a decade ago, long before the massive expansion of these programs that Debbie described just now, she created a college program at CIW, which is a women's prison in Southern California, that offered the AA program, an associate's degree, that has graduated more than 61 students with associate's degrees, and which will graduate 40 women with professional office skills certificates this year in March. And last year, Chaffey, under Laura's leadership, expanded their college program to CIM, which is the men's prison in Chino. And next to Laura is Monte Perez. He's been the president of Mission College since 2011. He began his career in higher education as the assistant director of admissions here at Stanford. And he has for a long time championed college opportunities for underserved students of all kinds, including, relevant to tonight, currently and formerly incarcerated students. And at Mission, right now he's working with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition to create dormitories for formerly incarcerated students. Then next to him here is Danny Murillo, who is a 2016 Soros Justice Advocacy Fellow at the Opportunity Institute. And what he's doing with that fellowship is creating a network of students throughout California who have successfully made the transition from incarceration to higher education. And as he may explain to you later, he's focusing on the UC system rather than the Cal State system, which is already being served very well by Project Rebound and its programs. And he, in case anyone did read my article, he was profiled in that. He was the first person who appeared because he was one of the founders of the Underground Scholars program at UC Berkeley before he graduated in 2015. And while he was at UC Berkeley, he was a McNair Fellow and he studied ethnic studies. And finally, but not least, Rebecca Silbert next to me, who is the Senior Vice President of the Opportunity Institute, and she works with Debbie there, and she oversees the Opportunity and Justice Division, and co-directs Renewing Communities. I encourage you to go on their website and learn more about this program, which I don't have time to tell you a lot about now, but suffice to say it's a multi-year initiative which is aimed to increase college opportunities for formerly and currently incarcerated people in California. And she co-authored Degrees of Freedom, which you saw a little bit about just now, and she formerly was a public defender. So that everyone introduced, I think I'm going to start by just giving a sense of what it's like for someone who has been incarcerated or is currently incarcerated to pursue an education, what that takes, and what are some of the barriers and obstacles that prevent more people from doing what Danny has done, and also Clint is in the audience, another person who's also at Berkeley and a fellow member of Underground Scholars with Danny. What are the obstacles that prevent people you've met inside from doing what you've done? Danny.
on the inside or once they come home?
Both.
Well, at least from my personal experience, when I started my education in solitary confinement at Pelican Bay State Prison, it was just the insecurity of not believing in myself, right? That I wasn't capable of being enrolled in a college program. I started with my GED in 2006 when I was in solitary confinement. The last time I went to school was in 1995. First day of 10th grade, I got kicked out of school. I never went back between 1995 and 2006. So that insecurity of even just doing my GED. But the good thing about where I was at, I was in a pod where there was actually people that were intellectually curious and that actually took the opportunity to be my tutors or to be my mentors. And I think that's what really planted the seed that people saw in me something that I couldn't see in myself, and that was whatever you want to call it, great capacity, skills, whatever it was. And it was really having through these relationships develop my, wanting to learn more, right? And I think for me, it was really about having a group of people around you that were, being able to help you to kind of progress through your education. And same thing happened when I came home. When I came home, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to go back to school. Because it was like it was an option, right? That was an option that I had at my disposal because there's no question when you apply. Anybody can go to community college, pretty much, right? So I knew that I wasn't going to be denied that. I went to community college and I actually ran into a friend who was formerly incarcerated. Just graduated from community college, was there to pick up his AA degree. I recognized him, and we just started talking, and he told me, I told him I'm just here to get my AA. And after that, I'm going to figure things out. And he started explaining to me, like, yo, I just graduated, I got my AA, I'm transferring to UC Irvine, I want to do pre-med, and I want to be a medical doctor. And to me, that was like just mind-blowing, right? Like, I never would have thought that somebody that I grew up with, right, somebody that I knew from the streets, were, whether it was selling crack, stealing cars, doing everything that that allowed us to survive where we come from, right? Him now taking it to the whole to a whole other level. And he just, in a 45-minute conversation, he just broke everything down, what I had to do to also make that same transition. Told me, yo, get involved in campus life. Make this your home. Get involved in student organizing, get involved in student clubs, go visit the Honor Scholars Program, go visit EOPS, go visit, talk to your academic counselors, and specifically, just choose one person and stick to that person. Don't go bouncing around, because a lot of times you're going to get so many different information from different people that it's going to confuse you, right? And that's pretty much, I took the advice, and I just ran with it. And I think that's also part of the survival skills that I bring with me to this academic setting, is knowing how to navigate certain institutions. I'm an expert at navigating institutions. I've been navigating the correctional institutions for over 14 years. So literally taking those same skills that I learned in prison and on the streets and transferring it into academia, right? And now I'm just trying to, how to replicate that, right? How to replicate that without having to stumble into these resources and shore up all those loose ends so that we can create a plan for people when we do get out of prison. Like, yo, this is a plan that works, and this is something that you can follow, as opposed to like, oh, you know what? Then we try to figure it out and kind of be lost. And I think really, for me, it was the people.
Mm-hmm.
The people.
So, I think in general, Danny's work is attempting to replicate that 45-minute conversation, which gave him a roadmap for the next few years to institutionalize it, to make sure that it's available to everyone and it doesn't depend on running in by accident to somebody you happen to know from the neighborhood who has your same history. So you hinted there at advantages that having been in prison, having learned how to navigate that institution can possibly create some advantages. And I was wondering, the obstacles to someone formerly incarcerated pursuing higher education are obvious, and you've elucidated on them. I wonder if you could talk about, and here I'd like to invite anyone who's been involved with both regular students and formerly incarcerated students, maybe Laura and Monte, to come in here. Are there advantages? Is there a kind of motivation? Is there a drive, perhaps, that people who have prison experience bring to their education that you don't see in ordinary 18-year-olds?
I think, at least from my experience, the more I got involved in education and started seeing the advantages that it offered me, I actually, I got more involved, and I just have this hunger, right? This hunger, that education is able to be for me, and it's also a very empowering. Education, a critical education, is very empowering, right? In so many ways, right? Before, I used to have this mindset of, I want power just for myself, an accumulation of power, and for me, that's like taking all the resources and keeping them for myself. And I no longer think that way, right? And that's definitely through education allowed me to be empowered and to use the same resources that I am accumulating along the way, and how to be able to give those back to people that are also going through the same transition as I am, right? And from my experience, and not just my experience, but just talking to even professors that go into prison, they see, folks that have this experience are some of the most, I guess what would be the more, how would be the perfect word to use? Focused, I guess, would be one word. Dedicated, and intellectually curious. And these are just some of the things that I hear from folks that go into the system and teach people in there.
I mean, what about Laura, Monte? Do you have anything to add, comparing you've worked with both kinds of students?
I think Danny's right. I think that what I've seen with my youth and adults is once the light turns on, they're very focused because they see the opportunities that they've always wanted but never thought they could have. A number of the young people I've worked with and adults didn't do well in school. They had other things going on in their lives that didn't promote a positive experience. And a lot of that had to do with the school itself. I believe in the school to prison pipeline. I think that does exist. So what happens is once they're empowered with the knowledge that they are college students, that they're intellectually curious, that they have a brain and they can contribute, things start happening. And my ARC program, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition program I have with Scott Budnick, where we have a residential program and they come to LA Mission. They are just so excited to go to school. They're running for student body president. They're volunteering. They're having clubs because they see that this is really the family. And I would agree with Danny wholeheartedly. It's relationships. Once they have established that relationship with a person or a counselor or a faculty member or another student, they get really excited about the possibilities, and their whole mindset, I think, is different. The one piece that I would like to say, and I would agree with Danny on, is they get to a point, many of my students, that how can I contribute? What can I do in my community where I came from, where all this stuff happened, and how can I help younger? Danny was just saying, I'd love to talk to some of your probation young men and women because they want to give back. And I have several of them are substance abuse counselors now that are working in nonprofits. They have this desire to give back. So it's a tremendous, if you will, if we can use economic return, a return on investment. The investment we make in higher education is tenfold as to what is going to happen when they move on with their lives. So that's my feeling.
Laura, I wonder if I could ask you
Of course.
both that and another question.
Sure.
Because you've been directing this college program for so long, I wondered if you could, in addition to talking about the students, tell us something about some of the difficulties you've encountered in setting up the program, and also what have you learned in those more than 10 years about setting up college programs inside prisons that you did not know or did not expect when you started?
Well, I think one of the things that is unique maybe about my experience is that our program at CIM is relatively new. So most of my experience is with women who've been incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. And one of the things that I would say about those women is that they really see education as a legacy moment, because often they are the caregiver in the family, and so they see that opportunity for education as a point in time not only where they transform their lives, but also they know that they transform the lives of generations that they are connected to, of their children and of their grandchildren. It gives me goosebumps even to talk about it. Talking to some of the women that they're taking math, say with us, and when they have their visits on the inside of the institution, they're talking to their grandchildren about the math class that they're taking. And so the transformation isn't just about the transformation of self, but the entire family unit. So that's, I think, a really powerful lesson, I would say. In terms of some of the difficulties, there are many, and they go from the very large philosophical kinds of challenges down to nitty-gritty, granular kinds of things like how do I get this into the institution? How do I teach a lab science in a correctional facility? But I would say the ones that are particularly difficult are you have to bridge the cultural divide with corrections and education. We are two very different entities with different aims. Even though rehabilitation is part of the Department of Corrections, not all officers are necessarily oriented to embrace that last R. And so you have to build those relationships in order to help motivate and enculturate some correctional staff to embrace education and its value. So I would say that's one huge piece. In keeping with that, I think one of the things that we've learned is how to develop persistence. Maybe the same kinds of things that students have to learn to develop. I am at CIW now on my 6th warden in 10 years. And the turnover is pretty enormous. But it's a new chance also to build a new relationship. And so you learn how to dig your roots kind of deeply so that not only, part of our sell is this is going to be great for you and great for the institution and great for the people that you're serving, but also to try to make that easy for them, try to make the sell, really obvious for them. And I will say, despite maybe varying levels of support, I can honestly say I've never felt unsupported at the executive level in corrections. So that's really a key and important value, I think.
Well, let me ask you about that because I understand that there's been some pushback, perhaps not with Chaffey's program, but Brent, I'd ask you about this. I understand that there's been some pushback from corrections officers in Cal State Los Angeles program because you were offering a BA degree free of charge, which was not an opportunity that was available to the corrections officers, and that there was resentment of this. Why did these guys get what we weren't offered? And I was just wondering how you dealt with that pushback, because obviously if the corrections officers are not on your side, you're going to have difficulty with the program. What did you do then?
Well, I would say that the problem, the pushback problem you're describing is nationwide. Mm-hmm. And you have to put yourself in the position of that correctional officer who, they started their career thinking that they were going to work as a prison guard, and they're going to protect and provide safety inside the prison. And no one told them that they're going to be a counselor or a teacher. That wasn't part of the deal that they signed up for. And suddenly, in 2005, CDCR decides, or CDC decides to put the R on the end of it. They changed their name. So the R has taken a while to come around. And the answer to your question, I would say, is that it's officer by officer, it's yard by yard, little by little. You have to convert the correctional officers to understand. You have them attend the graduation, and they can feel it. They see the change. I'll give you an example of a problem we had at one of the prisons in the Central Valley. We had an officer who was new to corrections, came out of law enforcement, and he was so frustrated with his job and ready to quit, and he was actually contemplating suicide because the job was so grim. He had already, in the first couple of weeks, witnessed a couple of murders and inmate suicide and just terrible things. And he was asked to go and change to a different yard. And if you don't know what a yard is, that's a different location on the prison site. And he didn't want to do it. He was asked to be the college officer that would work in that area. He thought it was a crazy idea, but he did it anyway. Fast forward 3-4 months, he comes to me in tears and tells me how that changed his life. How helping the inmate students go to school, it was a transformative experience, not only for the inmate, but also for him. And now it's his favorite place to be. Now, of course, we have him speaking all over the state because he's our poster child officer. So it's one by one, little by little, and really, it used to be that the wardens were a problem. Now the wardens all buy in. Now we're working with the yard captains. They're like the local warden, and getting them to buy in. So it's a little by little, one at a time.
And do you rely in getting one by one to buy in on just seeing the results, or do you have things that you say, arguments that you make? How do you talk to an individual who just doesn't see why this should happen at all?
Well, in the case that you brought up at what was that prison?
Lancaster.
Yeah, Lancaster. In that case, it required a phone call from me to the warden, and it was changed within 24 hours. And all they did was just move that officer.
Right.
But that didn't change that officer's opinion, and hopefully eventually he'll come around. But
One of the things that helps is to engage the correctional staff in what's happening, and I think that was illustrated in Brant's example. I had a situation once where, because when you're running a program like this, you are in and out of the facility all the time. It takes a lot of attending to. And I had come in and I was at the front desk getting checked in, and that officer knew me and had seen me kind of consistently, and he said, I want to ask you a question. And I said, okay. He says, are they even smart enough? And I said, well, why don't you come and judge that for yourself? I said, what time do you get off? So he was getting off like at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I said, why don't you come over to education? I know what's happening in class. I know they would welcome you to come in and hang out. So he did. He came over for about an hour. He didn't say anything. He didn't participate. He didn't do anything. But that hour did something, because he never gave me that kind of a question again, and he treated the program with a lot of respect and support after that. And I think one of the things that he saw is that this was a real college program. These students were engaged in very complex ideas, that we were protecting the integrity and the rigor of the program, and that we had high expectations for our students. So they were, I think, surprised at what was happening there. And so engaging him was one way maybe to do the one at a time that Brant's.
I can add to that real quick, is that at Camp Challenger, I have about 200 young men and women coming from other camps taking, they're there about 9 months, taking courses. And what happened was the leadership there at Camp Challenger, she thought, rather than these young men not doing really anything during the day, why don't we offer college classes? So we opened up and had several. And I went to visit, and what happened, it got infectious. The probation officers started transforming themselves into like tutors, and of course probation department supported it, the leadership, and provided some support funding for that activity. And what I saw happen is the staff transformed into like believing into these young men. And these young men started believing in themselves. They all had polo shirts that said Allen Mission College. They created a classroom. I didn't even know I had a satellite there, but now I do. And I was just touched by that. And the other thing that happened that was really phenomenal, so the staff started transforming. The young men started feeling like college students and very proud. But the family members came. The But guess what? They looked at their son or cousin or uncle or brother and they said, wow, you know, you're not that same person that came here, and for some of the parents, you're not that troublemaker that I wanted to get rid of because you just get me in trouble. And it was so fascinating to see that, and of course it's growing. So the point of it, it can be infectious. It can, in fact, transform the staff.
So that is a very good example of how you can show people what you're doing and why it's important and how transformative it is. Rebecca, I wonder if you could speak to, I think as right now programs in prisons are a small enough phenomenon that perhaps it's not attracting a large amount of attention, but as it begins to grow in the way that Debbie described, I wonder if there will be pushback from people in the general public, as there is now from some corrections officers. And I was wondering, in your work, how you think about that. If there are going to be, you can't bring the public into classrooms inside prisons in the way you can with corrections officers. What will you do? What arguments will you make?
Well, the short answer is that you can always amplify student voices. So the initiative that Debbie and I made is we are not on the ground with students or faculty in a college or a prison. We're working with the state, behind the state, advocating that the entire public education system really reach out and pull in for currently and formerly incarcerated students as students like any other that should be and can be served by our public higher education system. And that's not what the state has had in the past, but it's where the state needs to go. And so part of that is amplifying the student voices, which is we're often asked to speak at things, or we travel around, or we go to talk to faculty, always saying there are students on your campus, and not falling into the trap of this is Danny, he's awesome, he's an exception, which is true, not the exception part. Danny is awesome. But Danny's not the exception, and neither is Clint, and neither is anybody else. There are thousands upon thousands of students and potential students out there, and they are all capable, and they are all ready, and in many cases more than ready. And sometimes even the most well-intentioned people with whom we work fall into the trap of that there aren't enough of them, or they're not really ready, or it's too hard. And that's just not true, and really the best way to solve that is to amplify the student voice. The pushback that we get is not so much, why should those people go to college? I think we've been doing this since 2013, I think we've heard that a total of 0 times. We have gotten pushback from our allies, from our progressive criminal justice advocate allies, about whether this is the right use of energy, time, and money. And the pushback often comes in, shouldn't you be worried about housing? Shouldn't you be worried about jobs? Shouldn't you be worried about X, Y, Z? And the answer is yes, 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 and that doesn't mean you shouldn't also think about college. And the answer also is there's something about college. There's something different. And we've had for decades a system where the GED was the answer. Go to prison, make sure there's a statute. Go to prison, make sure you give them the GED. Re-entry programs, really good re-entry programs on the ground. Get your GED, get your GED. And college really has been the icing on the cake. And it shouldn't be. But that's probably, and we still face that pushback. And some of it is, when you have a universe of a limited pie, what should come first? And if someone doesn't have a place to live, they can't go to college. There's no question about that. But that doesn't mean you can't also fight college.
So, jumping off of that, that tension within your own community, I was wondering if we could jump to a larger question. The larger question is, what is the purpose of college? Why is college different? And in particular for formerly and currently incarcerated students. One of the questions that has come up as Debbie and I were discussing this panel in advance was what kind of education should be offered in prison and to formerly incarcerated people? Should it be very pragmatic, focused on vocational work, focused towards getting jobs, on the more practical aspects of making a life after prison, or should it be a more liberal arts degree such as students outside are offered? And I wonder if, I don't know who wants to speak to this. I imagine you all have opinions about this. Maybe Monte, I don't know if you want to start.
Sure, I read that as part of one of the questions, and I was pondering that question. An LA mission, and I think our philosophy is the students should go as far as they want to go. I have a student that became a welder, formerly incarcerated. Now he's in engineering school at UCLA. He wanted to be an engineer. But there's a lot to be said about going back, having an income, making sure you have living quarters that are free from any intrusion by former situations and family, perhaps making sure that you can provide food on the table for your daughter or your son. You know, those are responsibilities that also occur. So our philosophy has been, we want you to go as far as you want to go, but if you want to start right away in terms of jobs, and we're not talking flipping hamburgers, we're talking IT or media or information, you know, or culinary arts, where you have a decent job and you can grow into that. And I know we can chat about how we make it stackable so they can go out in the job market and they can come back and take more courses, get their AA, decide to transfer if they want. Most of my students in the art program want to transfer. They want a baccalaureate. A number of my other students want to come in, get a certificate or AA, and go into the work world right away, whether it be in areas like biotech or, you know, areas where they can find employment, construction. So that happens too. So being a community college, we're open to providing that access.
Danny, can I ask, I wonder if you could speak on this also, because you said how driven you were to become a student as you were getting out. I wonder if you could specify what was in that drive. Was it intellectual? Because you said you had a lot of intellectual stimulation inside with the people you happened to be on the pod with, or was it the drive to get on with your life and get a good job? I mean, could you talk a little bit about what you think is a good motivator for people to pursue education?
For me, it was a little bit of everything, right? One was definitely not being back on the streets, right? Being at community college kept me off the streets. You know, when I first got out, they had me on a GPS monitor for almost a year. So, like I said, I got out of solitary confinement. Anybody gets out of solitary confinement, they would put you on a GPS monitor. And my parole officer would tell me, like, yo, what are you doing you're at campus from 7 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. Like he can want a computer and check where I'm at, right? And it would keep track of, like, literally keep track of everywhere that I've been to, right? And he would tell me, dude, you're on campus from 7 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. And then I see there's always a break between 12 and 5 where you go home. So I would go eat, right? And my mom lived like 10 minutes away from the campus. And for me, that was one of the motivators. Like, it literally kept me off the streets. By staying off the streets, I would, you know, not getting pulled over, not running around, not hanging out with people that I shouldn't be hanging around with, that could probably give me a parole violation. Even if it was just stopping at a friend's house, saying, hey, how you doing? He might be on parole, and if he catches together, that's a parole violation. Just for visiting somebody that might be on parole, right? So for me, it was very, very strategic. It kept me from going back to prison. That's one thing, right? And then once I got involved in campus life, mind you, I did a 14-year sentence, right? From the age of 16 to the age of 30. So I have no work history. Never worked a day in my life, right? Unless, you know, you count selling drugs, right? But, so I have no actual work experience, and being at the community college actually gave me that. Now, I got a job through financial aid, through work studies. I actually got to work in an office, right? When I first got out, the only job that I was able to get was working at a warehouse, and I worked there for 6 months. And I was only able to, the wage was $8 an hour, right? And luckily, because I was living at my mom's, I didn't have to pay rent, I didn't have to pay my phone bill, I didn't also do. I didn't have to pay rent, my food, and things like that, right? That was, my mom covered all that, you know? So it really gave me the opportunity to develop my network, a work resume, actually learn how to navigate the institution by meeting other people on campus, you know, whether it's counselors. I literally spent my whole time at the writing center. The writing center was really the place where I really like flourished, right? Like I would go there, basic English writing classes, and I'll take my paper and professor would tell me, like, yo, what kind of, you're in basic English 52, like you should be in English 103 already, like, you know, and there was really there that people were encouraging me, like, yo, you need to apply to transfer. Like you have, you know, in terms of writing, you have what it takes to be a great writer and you know, and take that advantage of it to transfer, right? So for me, the university was like this basket full of resources. And being able to tap into that was very empowering, right? And also how, and then also learning how to take what I've learned and just to give it back to other people.
I wonder if, anyone else, I mean, because obviously ideally, what Monte said would be the case, that there would be whatever any student wanted, but if there's a situation where there are limited resources, you have to make decisions between vocational classes and liberal arts classes.
I think the short answer to the question is we who are not the students don't get to decide what the students do. Right? That's the obvious ethical answer. And then raise it with Laura because you can't offer in CIW anything that's offered on the Chaffey campus. It's an impossibility. So she's in the position of having to decide. So for Debbie, it's easy because we can take this position. Like, we're not going to tell her what to do.
Right.
And she's got to make the hard decision.
Well, I think in some way, I guess my initial reaction was it almost doesn't matter. And the reason I would say that is because the educational enterprise in a lot of ways has such symbolic content for students who are incarcerated. They really have taken a step toward transformation and renewal. And you've heard the word, you know, infectious, contagious. I'm not a big fan of medical models usually, but I think that's also the case with education, both for students who are incarcerated and for students who have never been incarcerated. We have 3 different points of access for students in CIW and in CIM. We have a non-credit life skills course for students who feel very insecure about their transition or whether or not they think they're college ready. And it's focused on well-being, 5 domains of well-being. If those students who want to experiment a little bit like that class, they can go into a certificate program. If they get the certificate and they really feel charged up about education, they can move on to an associate's degree. We had 40 students move this last semester from the certificate program they started and moved into an associate's program because they convinced themselves and we convinced them that they could do it. So I think it's the same evolutionary process. You change your mind not only about who you are, but who you can become. And that's what we're there to provide, is the opportunity for you to become someone else. That's what all college does for us. And so I think that's why it's important to have different opportunities, but I don't see it as necessarily as an either-or choice of CTE or liberal studies or because those lines are erasing too. You know, you can't become an auto mechanic without good critical thinking and research skills and good problem solving. So a lot of the barriers that are kind of between those traditional worlds don't exist anymore in education because no longer can you say, well, I'm just going to work on cars, so I'll read the repair manuals that come out every year. Well, you're going to have to read 1 million pages. So you better know how to research. You better know how to eliminate problems, right? You better know how to test conclusions. So those same skills are the same things that you're teaching a student who's in a degree program.
I wonder if we could talk also about, since on the same line of practical versus larger goals for having an education, again, supposing limited resources, let's imagine that you can't, you don't have enough resources to offer education to everybody. Do you put at the front of the line people who are most likely to be able to put it to practical use, which is to say people who are, let's say, 5 years or less from getting out, and perhaps younger people? Or do you allow everyone equal access, even if they may be in for life, or they may be approaching retirement age and are much less likely to put their education to the use of finding a job?
So I can tell you what we do.
Yeah.
Every inmate is given a needs assessment, and if one of those needs happens to be education, then they're put on the list as first priority to participate in some type of education, whether it be for technical education or getting their high school equivalency or college. If the classes aren't full, then we fill them with other people that may be there in prison for a longer term. And the college programs typically do have more students that are there for a long time because they've already been through these other programs. They've earned their GED, and they may have 2 or 3 different certifications in welding and auto mechanics and heating, ventilation, air conditioning. And we encourage them to move on and go to college. What that does, it not only provides a benefit for that person and helps when they go to the parole board, but it also helps the institution, because when we have more educated people that are on the yard, they have better critical thinking skills, as you were mentioning, Laura, and they make better decisions. And so the violence actually is decreased.
This is actually an issue that we had to struggle with a little bit, and maybe this is something you want to speak to.
Sure.
But, the community colleges individually are governed by our governing boards, who are publicly elected officials. So they're politicians, which means whatever we do with the college, they're likely to get questions about. And this kind of question comes up rather often. And it comes up often in my particular area because I live in a fairly conservative county. And so we did establish a policy of 3-to-1 non-lifers to lifers, in part because of the implications about how the education would likely be used. And we wanted to invest in people who were going to return into the communities. To be honest with you, lifers are a very stabilizing force in an educational environment. The lifers tend to be really great ways to inspire and connect and help things move on in an orderly fashion. But because our governing board felt the need to be able to justify the programming and the investment that we were using the public money for, we did privilege non-lifer students over lifer students.
Our board is a LA board. They've given us the green light to do more, but they really want to focus primarily on reentry. Their goal is to ensure that once the formerly incarcerated, whether 1 year to 5 years or wherever long, that we create a pathway for them to reenter into the community. As far as the resource question, it is a good question because there are people, faculty, and community members that say, well, you're investing this money here. Why don't you invest it, on homeless or foster? We have all those populations. In fact, many of our formerly incarcerated are foster, homeless, and also have mental health challenges. So we built a reentry effort, not just on our dime. We had to partner with nonprofits, with the county. We had to partner with experts that we are not. I'm an educator. My counselors are academic counselors. They're not masters of social work counselors. They're not necessarily mental health specialists. So I partnered with other organizations so they can bring the resources necessary to the campus, because we couldn't afford it to do a holistic program on our own. So that's how I justified to my board and to individuals like, well, how can you do this? Well, we're not paying for the whole thing. We are getting reimbursed for the instruction, and we are providing some additional resources that are allocated to us with the state of California. But there are others that are investing in this population, and we're partnering with them. So that's how we kind of address the issue.
And I don't know if you have
If I may piggyback on to what Laura and Brad was saying, right? I really want to emphasize the importance of actually offering education to folks that are doing long-term sentences, like people that might not even never get out, because they are a stabilizing force on the yard, right? A lot of times, people that are going home, the lifers are elders, right? Like there's people that have been there for 30 years, right? And just so much full of wisdom and knowledge, right? And they really are folks that can stabilize certain situations that can get out of hand on a prison facility, right? And having them being part of having them involved in the education program also can be very positive for them, and what they can bring back to the yard. Once they get out of class, what they bring back to the yard is also bringing back that knowledge to folks that maybe don't want to be in a program, because they don't want to be in a school setting, because they have these very bad experiences with teachers growing up. So they go back to the yard and they are the teacher. They create the reading groups and the study groups, and those things right there that also make an impact on the facility, and they change the culture, right? In terms of the violence and stuff that can happen on these facilities.
And just to be more specific, I mean, you told me the most extraordinary story about how you, when you were studying math in prison, I hope you can tell, there was somebody else who was tutoring you. You couldn't see each other,
Right.
but you were yelling. Could you
Yeah.
explain what happened?
So when I decided to do my GED, which was in 2006, there was a gentleman that was brought into the pod, right? It was 8-man pods, four cells on the bottom, 4 cells on top. You're in solitary confinement, you don't see nobody, but you can yell out your door and people will hear you. And one day I heard this gentleman he had just arrived to the pod that I was in, was talking to somebody else through the vent, through the air ventilation, and he was offering somebody like, yo, I can help you with your math tutoring. If you need help with math tutoring, I can help you with your GED. And as soon as I heard that, I yelled out, hey, yo, I want some help too. I'm thinking about doing my GED. And the thing was that from 5 to 6, we would take up the whole time we call it the tier, right? The tier. And nobody else would have a conversation going on. It was just me and him yelling back to each other, and him telling me like the formulas of my, doing to do my math. For almost 8 months, he did that. When it comes to math, I'm not good at it, right? Like it literally put me in jeopardy from going to Berkeley, right? But it was just 8 months of just yelling back and forth, right? And him tutoring me, like to prepare for my GED.
I think we're in agreement because you've got a panel of practicalists, but I think it's important to recognize that this issue is actually highly contentious in our world, in the world in which we all work. If higher education is a right and not a privilege, how dare we say that some people get it and others don't? How can you go to a prison and say, you and you get college and you're stuck here, so sorry? And there are many people in California and nationally who argue that strongly. Now, most of them are offering their college programs through private universities. So they do not have public boards of trustees. And they have private universities that forgive tuition and forgive the costs as part of the university's mission. So they also do not have the budgetary constraints. They're not necessarily operating in the same world that Brantley, and Monte are operating in. But I think it's worth pointing out that it is perhaps something for which there's not necessarily a right answer. And it may come down to your beliefs. And then some people fall, yes, it should be a right and not a privilege, but maybe what about offensive conviction? If it was a horrible sex offense and the person is never leaving, violent, horrible sex offense, did that person get college? Well, if it's a right and that person is ready for college and they're going to be a participant in the class, and it's, one of the things that Laura and the Chaffey team say all the time about their CIW program and CIM is you cross that threshold and you are not CDCR number blank, you are not an offender, you become a student. So if anyone can do that, shouldn't they all have an equal chance? And I don't have the answer, and I think personally I go back and forth, but it is something that people talk about and debate about quite extensively.
Let me ask you about that, because I was wondering, it seems as though insofar as education for currently incarcerated people is debated in the public sphere, it's often sold to the public as a measure against recidivism. It will help prevent people from cycling in and out back into prison, money, it's sold on a pragmatic basis. But if you do that, you kind of cut off your ability to say, no, it's actually a right for everyone. It seems like you have to choose one of the two ways of selling it because they kind of conflict. And I'm wondering if by selling it on this very intuitively persuasive, pragmatic basis, you are creating trouble for yourself down the line if you want to make an argument that it's a right for everyone, not just dependent on whether it's going to save taxpayers money. I don't know if anyone has any comment on that, Brantley.
I think it depends on what your end game is. If your end game is, I'm going to prepare this person with college so they can therefore gain employment, then it makes sense just to provide it for those that are actually going to win the game. But if your end game is, I'm going to provide education for this person and that person to change the society, to change the internal society of the prison, or maybe society if they do get out, it just depends on where you're coming from. And I think that probably all of us on this panel are in both camps because we've seen it happen. I see the value of providing education to the lifer because they change the internal society, the culture. They become the elders of the yard, and they mentor the youngsters that are coming in that would never touch school, but suddenly they're interested in it because they want to be like that person someday.
I also think too, there's a role for lifers, not just as students. And that's something that I think we've established at CIW. We're still working on that at CIM. But one of our tutors is a woman who spent more time in prison than any other woman in California. And one of the things that's, in a lot of ways, that she's told me has saved her life is the capacity to work as a tutor in the Chaffey program.
And she has a master's degree.
And she has a master's degree. And so rather than putting it in a situation where, as you described, if you found those resources out on your own and people helped you in an informal way, you can set up situations where people who are lifers can be a part of the infrastructure that helps other students move on. And now they also have a position of value and purpose that maybe isn't the end role, is not going to be to get that degree or that certificate, but to help other people. And that ends up being a powerfully transformative experience in and of itself, too. So I think we need to go beyond just thinking about roles of students and non-students. So,
We're actually building an internal workforce.
yes.
And these folks become tutors, and it's actually a job. They get paid to do it.
That's their full-time job, is to be a tutor for our program.
And some of them are more effective than the teachers that come in from the outside just because of their background. We don't ever call them teachers, but they actually do teach classes, and they teach math.
They do.
We have about 20 minutes left, and I was wondering if people have questions. And if they do, I would be grateful if you could come to one of those two microphones so that your question will be recorded as part of this session. Does anyone have a question?
I had a practical question that I was thinking about as I was listening to the conversation and didn't quite know what to think about it, so I'd ask, which is, if with the exception of the lifers you're describing, would it be, from your point of view, a desirable thing in terms of a policy and the effects it would have in the classroom if successful completion of classes were in some way tied to an accelerated release from prison? Would that be socially good? Would it be educationally good? Because there would be a pretty big carrot there, I would imagine.
So my answer to that will depend on how you voted on Prop 57.
I voted the right way.
I can tell you that within the department and at the policy table, which is the table that I sit on, that we're at, we are trying to figure out Prop 57 and what the ramifications are. The governor's budget came out, and we see certain things in there, and we're trying to figure out how to make that work. But I can tell you that when it does come out, that there will be an impact on the release dates. So there will be some incentives for people to take college classes and incentives to actually complete. Over the past several years, we have been already providing incentives for taking college classes. And essentially, if you qualify for what we call the milestone program, there are certain offenses that don't qualify, but if you do qualify for it, then essentially it's for every course you take, that's 1 week off of your sentence. So that's already in place.
Independent of your performance in the class.
You have to complete the class, and you have to have a passing grade in the class. What Prop 57 is going to allow us to do is expand that. Right now, you can only do up to 6 weeks. So you can take 6 courses a year and get a maximum of 6 weeks off your sentence. That's going to expand to more. And also, they'll be receiving additional time for actually completing an AA degree or a bachelor's degree or a high school diploma.
Thanks.
I don't have a question. I can say it because I guess it's very here.
Sir, could you speak a little
I think that
a
microphone
little
is
louder?
on.
It's on.
Nobody's ever told
There
me.
you go.
Nobody's ever told me that. Speak loud. Okay. It was fortuitous that I was able to meet John Elvin Stephenson this morning for the first time in my life. And for those who don't know who he is an advocate for exonerees. And I'm here to bear witness that a college education, while incarcerated, just like this gentleman, does serve society a lot more than just being an elder, being a tutor on the art. Because I can assure you that the return on investment of educating an individual is a lot greater than what it is just incarcerating an individual and letting them rot in a prison yard. Okay? I could have chimed in on so much of the conversation here today, but I had to hold back because it's not my place. But I'm grateful for what you guys stand for. I hope that you guys continue to shed light on this situation because I know, I was shocked because I wear multiple hats because not only was I incarcerated and I served 9 of a 15-year term, but I did it for something I did not commit. Okay, so I served time for something I didn't do. I was able to escape through education, not only to become a better human being, but also to escape the nightmare that I was living through. So therefore, I know what it is to walk a prison yard. I know what it is to see these gentlemen come back and forth. The recidivism rate is absolutely crazy. So as I see all these men coming back and forth, I realize, wait a minute, and look at the few folks that I attended school with, and look at what they were able to do with their lives, and these men are not returning. I don't know, only one that I ever see returning, and this was while I was working on my AA degree. None of the gentlemen who earned bachelor's degrees ever came back. Granted, a lot of them were lifers, and just to chime in on that, because I saw with my own eyes, I lived with these men for so many years. But a lot of those lifers, it's unfortunate that your county is so conservative. But those gentlemen who are sitting there with those life sentences over their head, they could perhaps, they are making better use of that education than a lot of the folks that are getting out and either may or may not be returned to prison. But, so, I don't know who's here. The reason I came here today is because I have not been able to speak out. I have been flying under the radar because I had lost jobs because of my record. Now that I've been exonerated, now that I have this weight off my shoulders, I can come out and try to be an advocate. So one of my missions, my part of my agenda, was to try to push for education, higher education for men and women while they're in, and again, perhaps after they get out as well. But I had no idea because the college programs I was involved in back in the 80s were all cut. Okay, I had no idea. First, there were only about 12 prisons back then. Now there were so many more. And when I saw all those programs out there, I was just blown away. I'm so glad that these exist. Because I wanted to get out there and advocate for them, but it seems, that the programs are already there. I still wish that I could advocate one way or another, but anyways, I don't want to monopolize all the time. I just wanted to make sure to serve as a witness that, hey, it works. Congratulations.
Let me clarify a little bit. Somehow we got sidetracked on this lifer situation, but most of the lifers are returning.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about life without parole. That's a different population. And there's a mantra that our Undersecretary of Corrections has pushed and talks about often with our wardens, and the mantra is today's inmate is tomorrow's neighbor. And when you talk about the public benefit of providing these programs, the reality is that person is in solitary confinement, like Danny described, could literally go from solitary confinement right to the streets. And would you rather do that? Can you imagine if you didn't have the tutoring through the vents and that opportunity, you'd probably be right back. And that's what happens.
Hi. Congratulations, Daniel. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I appreciate that. And bravo to all of you for forging this newer territory. And I work in the criminal justice system. Thanks to this great department and Deborah, Rob, and Joni bringing Stanford University courses into a local treatment program called Hope House, and educating our criminal justice population that is deferred to treatment versus being incarcerated. That inspiration stays with them, and many of them continue on with education that they never thought that they could get. They never thought that they were entitled to it. So it's just been a wonderful program and a wonderful experience. So thank you to everybody. My question is that I might have missed this part, but is the education inside prisons in a classroom setting? So my question is then, how does classification allow the different groups to be together? Because in our county jail, that's a big roadblock to a lot of the gangbangers or people that are in isolation, or the higher criminal population is being excluded for a lot of the programming that could very well help them get out of that cycle. So how do you get around the classification issue of putting everyone together? So when you asked about the crimes, like if somebody has a sex offense versus petty theft, because I'm not going to be in prison, but you know what I mean, putting those folks together in our jails is an issue.
Yeah, jail and prison are definitely, different situations in terms of classification. And we're fortunate at CIW that students, we call them students, that the people who are incarcerated are not segmented by crime or by classification. So they live in an integrated environment, and so that creates a unique opportunity for us. It's much easier. CIM is a little more complex because they are divided by yards, and so we are in the process of developing different programs for different yards because we can't integrate the student population in that way.
Thank you.
At the county, and I think Brant, you can probably respond to this, at the LA County, they were in a merit program. So they had to earn their way within in order to participate in the classes. But we skip by a lot of the custody versus educational issues that do occur. Because we worked in the county, and Brant knows while he was working with us back in LA, as well as the probation camps. I couldn't have more than 15 students in a room. And, I would get reimbursed for 15. I get reimbursed for 30 to meet the cost of instruction. So we had to juggle it in a way and convince them that we can have 30, we'll do it twice. And those kind of issues do crop up. Also, when you offer art classes as a treatment focus, we use the word treatment, art is really a very good therapy for a lot of individuals. Writing is a great therapy. And some of the staff would go, you're rewarding them. They don't deserve that. The others should, the more pleasant ones that we work with should get art. Why are you rewarding them? We say, no, it's a therapy. It's a treatment. It's a modality. And so those issues do crop up, but we work through them with the leadership of those facilities. Brad, do you want to respond to that?
I was just gonna say that overall, the prison system is somewhat divided up by security level. There's 4 different levels, 4 being the highest security level. So you'll have a Pelican Bay, which is a level 4 prison, or Corcoran. And within any given prison, they're separated out by different needs. We have yards that are called the sensitive needs yards for people that are basically protected from being hurt. And so they're already separated for that reason. But I will tell you that as far as college coming into the prisons, it doesn't make any difference the security level. One of our most successful programs is at Pelican Bay State Prison, right where you were doing ventilation tutoring. And that's a level 4 prison. So if they can pull that off, anybody can.
I would probably disagree that making a pragmatic argument undermines making a rights argument as far as, whether or not college and prison is worthwhile. I think, you can make the argument that it is a fundamental right and it also makes pragmatic sense to do it. But I was wondering how much research currently is going on to see the effect of these programs as far as, quantifying a dollar value on this.
I would actually add to that question. This is something I was going to ask as well, because I know there is a lot of research done that suggests that education offsets recidivism, but I was wondering, there's obviously some kind of selection bias going on there. Is it possible that, how can you tell whether it's the education that's spurring people to stay out of prison, and to what extent is it self-selected, that the people who are motivated to pursue education are people who are motivated to move on with their lives and keep out of prison anyway? How do you figure that out? Yeah.
So there's different research out there, and it reflects that selection bias in different ways. So if you are looking at the statements made by a particular program that has an application process, it's just cut to the chase, cherry picking, and they say, we have a 0% recidivism rate, there's some selection bias there. But you have Ranch did a meta-analysis of education in prison in 2012. 2014. Well, it was issued in 2014, right? So they did a big meta-analysis of all the studies, and they corrected for it, and they still found a reduction in recidivism. So I think the reduction in recidivism is fully established, even accounting for selection bias. What I think is interesting is trying to develop more research, and some of that we are doing the other night, and some of it's happening in other parts of the country, really on the qualitative side rather than the quantitative side. And of course, qualitative research is always exceedingly challenging. It's especially challenging when you're dealing with incarcerated students who have to go through all kinds of IFP and all kinds of layers of complication. But trying to pin down in a way that can be expressed in a data and research way to express why and how education is so valuable in terms of becoming a leader in your community, in terms of self-worth, in terms of intergenerational impact. I think that's the next frontier. We're not there yet, but we collectively as a country, people who care about this, are trying to get there.
Could you tell a little bit about intergenerational impact studies? What kinds of work are you doing?
That there are some in process.
It intuitively makes sense in the way that Laura was describing earlier, but I didn't
There's
know.
lots of anecdotes, and then there's the data for the rest of there is nothing about which I'm aware where there's been a longitudinal intergenerational study on higher education for currently incarcerated people in particular. There's lots of information about intergenerational impact of higher education in general.
Right.
There's lots of research about recidivism and criminality, which I'm going to air quotes, and how that is an intergenerational phenomenon. The overlap between the two, I think, is still if anyone wants to write a PhD thesis, go for it.
Thank you for coming. So I'm from New York State, which is a progressive state by most measures, not as far as California, and I was in a state prison this summer and learned that not only do we no longer have college programs, and at least the prison I was in, because of the cutting of Pell Grant funding, was the reason I was given, but there's also no longer even GED programs in that prison because they can't get computers in for state rules. That's what I was told. So what that means is there's just no way to get even a GP in that prison. So you're all in California, which is a pretty progressive state. Debbie talked about these changes that happened 2014, 2016. What were the efforts that were made to get to that point where now you can bring programs into the prisons that you think would be translatable to other states?
I can tell you that it was a kind of the stars all aligned at the same time. We had the Degrees of Freedom report that was published by Debbie and Rebecca. At the same time, we had a supporting senator, Ryan Hancock, who was writing a bill, Senate Bill 1391. And when those two things converged, it helped, I guess, get the bill passed. And so there was will from our legislature to do it, to help pay for it. And that is a benefit that California has over most other states. I have the opportunity to travel around the country and meet with the other folks in my position in other states, and they're trying to figure out how to get things donated and get colleges to come in and volunteer, and we have a pretty good thing going here.
Hello, thank you all for all your contributions. Very interested in hearing out from the United Kingdom. Just by way of background, I am here as a fellow, but I sit as a commercial court judge in the UK. I head Prince Charles's ex-offenders program. We now have programs in 12 prisons involving over 200 mentors. I just wanted to say one of the things we have been doing is to create the prison as a school. So we have a school of construction, for example, in prison, where people get 9 certificates before they come out. We then meet them at 8, and we have also joined with corporates to give them jobs. So if you get a person a job, we have found the reoffending rate drops from 81%, 21%, 20%, just by giving them a job. We have created a restaurant in prison. There are now 4. It's called Clink. And there's a program on the BBC made on this. And people in their last 2 years of their sentence are taught to be chefs. And members of the public come in and they can use that restaurant. And then these chefs, they get jobs going out. So the idea, we have a school of construction, a school of scaffolding, we've taken over the prison bakery to create a place where you learn to be pastry chefs. We get people coming from outside, teaching them to be pastry chefs, and they're selling their breads and cakes to these very people. I am here doing some work on entrepreneurship and technology and introducing that into prison. The point I want to make is simply that the prison does not have to be a place that you lock people up. If you lock someone up for 23 hours a day, you create a monster. If you have someone locked up, if you give them training and then meet them at the gate, you have a mentor, and then you release them back into society, you get a